It was just another typical day in the sprawling intergalactic offices of Xenotech Enterprises, where humans and aliens alike worked side by side. As one of the few humans on the payroll, I, Jake Mercer, had grown accustomed to the strange customs and practices of our alien counterparts. Most of the time, the job was straightforward: reports, logistics, attending meetings that often involved translators for beings from dozens of planets. But today something felt off. My boss, Zyla, had been acting strange since the morning briefing. Zyla wasn't just any boss. She was from the planet Eloxer, a world known for its advanced technology, diplomacy, and a race of beings whose cold, logical demeanor earned them a fearsome reputation across the galaxy. Zyla was no different. She was efficient, intimidating, and had an almost robotic perfection in her work. Her violet eyes were often so sharp that I swore they could cut through steel, and her slender form moved with a precision that made her seem more machine than biological. Today, however, something about her was different. It started with the little things. Zyla's usual clipped, concise instructions came out more slowly, and her words seemed hesitant, even jumbled at times. I dismissed it as a bad day. Everyone has them, right? But as the hours ticked by, her behavior only became more peculiar. When I handed her a datapad with the latest quarterly reports, she didn't immediately dive into them like she normally would. Instead, she looked at me, really looked me, with a focus that was unsettling. "Jake," she said, her voice softer than usual, "could you stay behind for a moment?" This was the beginning of the real trouble. I glanced at my wristwatch, noting the time. "Sure, of course," I replied, trying to suppress the mild discomfort rising in my chest. After the other employees left the room, Zyla motioned for me to follow her into her private office. Once we were inside, the door slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing us in. Zyla turned to face me, her usual stoic expression faltering. Her eyes, those piercing violet eyes, seemed almost frantic. "There's something important I need to discuss with you, and I require your discretion." "Of course," I replied, my brow furrowing. It wasn't often Zyla called for private conversations outside of official business. I leaned forward slightly, waiting for her to continue. She hesitated for a moment, which was strange in itself. I had never seen Zyla hesitate. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "It's my mating period." For a moment I thought I misheard her. I'm sorry, did you say—" "Yes," she interrupted, her usual sharpness back, though there was an underlying desperation in her tone. "As you know, Eloxarians have very specific biological cycles, and I am entering my mating period. It is not something I can control, and it is problematic in a professional setting." I blinked, trying to process what she was telling me. Mating period. I'd heard rumors about certain alien species having specific reproductive cycles, but Zyla had always seemed above such things. She was all logic, all business. There was no room for biological urges in the Zyla I knew. "Okay," I said carefully. "And what does that have to do with me?" Zyla's gaze flicked toward me, her usually cold eyes now filled with something much more intense. "It is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The pheromones I am producing are affecting the people around me. It will only worsen over the next few days, and I require assistance in maintaining my control." "Pheromones?" I repeated, my voice a little higher than usual. "So you're saying this is going to affect everyone in the office?" Zyla nodded. "It already has begun. I've noticed certain individuals behaving erratically, and it is only a matter of time before it escalates." She stepped closer to me, and I could feel the warmth radiating off her. My heart started to pound in my chest. "That is why I called you here." I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close she was standing. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Zyla's gaze didn't waver. "I need you to monitor the staff closely, report any unusual behavior, and, if it becomes too much, I may need you to assist me directly in containing the effects." I wasn't sure what she meant by assist her, but the weight of the request settled heavily in my stomach. Zyla, my incredibly powerful, efficient, and undeniably intimidating boss, was asking for help with something deeply personal, something I hadn't even imagined could happen. "I'll do my best," I said, my voice slightly shaky. Zyla let out a breath, her posture relaxing slightly. "Thank you, Jake. This is not easy for me to admit, but I trust you will handle this with the discretion it requires." I nodded quickly, my mind still reeling from the information. I wasn't sure how I was going to manage this situation, but there was no turning back now. As I left her office, the weight of what she'd said sank in deeper. The next few days were going to be a challenge. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept wandering to Zyla's admission. Was this really happening? Sure, intergalactic workplaces were full of oddities, but this was on a whole new level. I glanced around at the other employees. A few of them seemed fidgety, their movements less coordinated than usual. Was it starting already? My coworker Lila, a half-human, half-Cathelian hybrid, passed by and gave me a curious look. "You okay, Jake? You seem distracted." I forced a smile, just a lot on my mind. "How's your day going?" She shrugged, her feline-like tail flicking behind her. "Weird vibe in the office today, right? I can't put my finger on it, but something feels off." I swallowed, trying to keep my face neutral. "Yeah, I noticed, probably just one of those days." But I knew it wasn't just one of those days. The pheromones Zyla mentioned were already at work, and I had a feeling things were going to get a lot more complicated before they got better. Chapter 2. The Effect Spread. The next day at Xenotech Enterprises started with an eerie tension that hung in the air, as if the entire office was teetering on the edge of chaos. I'd spent the previous evening running through my conversation with Zyla over and over, trying to figure out how I was supposed to handle this situation. I wasn't a medical expert, and I certainly wasn't equipped to manage the bizarre biological processes of my alien boss. As soon as I walked into the office, it was clear that things were already spiraling out of control. Zyla's mating period had become a much bigger problem than either of us had anticipated. Lila, who had been so friendly and calm the day before, was now pacing near the break room, her feline tail swishing erratically as her eyes darted around like a predator searching for prey. "It's so hot in here today, isn't it, Jake?" she said, her voice breathy almost. "Sultry, don't you feel it?" I froze, blinking at her. I guess maybe the climate control's acting up. But it wasn't just Lila. Throughout the office, employees were showing signs of agitation, their movements jittery, conversations more animated than usual. There was a palpable energy in the air, and I knew exactly what was causing it. Zyla's pheromones. I hurried to my desk, trying to avoid any more strange encounters. The closer I got to Zyla's office, the more intense the atmosphere became. My own pulse quickened, and I found it harder to focus. This wasn't just a matter of professional decorum anymore. This was turning into a full-blown workplace crisis. I needed to talk to her, and soon. But when I approached Zyla's office door, it was locked. That was odd. She never locked her office unless there was a high-level meeting going on, and I hadn't seen any dignitaries or high-ranking officials visiting today. I tapped my comm link, sending a message through the office network. "Jake, Zyla, we need to talk. Things are getting strange out here." There was no immediate response. I waited for a moment, then knocked on her door lightly. No answer. A faint noise, like hurried movement, came from inside, but I couldn't make out much else. Something wasn't right. Just as I was about to walk away, the door slid open a crack, and Zyla peeked through. Her usually perfect posture was slumped, her hair slightly disheveled, and her skin, normally a smooth bluish hue, seemed to shimmer with a faint golden glow. Her eyes, however, were the most striking change. The usual cold violet irises were now almost glowing with an intensity that made me take a step back. "Zyla," I asked cautiously, "are you okay?" She stared at me for a long moment, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. "It's worse than I anticipated," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The pheromones, they're affecting everyone." "Yeah, I noticed," I said, glancing back at the chaos slowly brewing in the office behind me. "We need to do something before this gets completely out of hand." Zyla nodded, then opened the door a little wider. "Come in, I need your help." I stepped inside, the door hissing shut behind me. Her office, normally immaculate and perfectly organized, looked like a storm had blown through it. Papers were scattered everywhere, datapads blinking with unattended messages, and the faint scent of something sweet, almost intoxicating, filled the air. I quickly realized that this was Zyla's scent. Her pheromones were in full effect now. and being in such close proximity to her made my heart race. "I've been trying to suppress the effects," Zyla explained, leaning against her desk. "But it's difficult. The pheromones are stronger than I anticipated, and they're starting to affect me too." My mind scrambled for a solution. "Isn't there anything from your home planet that can help? Some kind of medication or, I don't know, a blocker?" Zyla shook her head. "Eloxarians rely on meditation techniques and isolation during this period. However, given my responsibilities here, isolation is not an option." I raked a hand through my hair. "Okay, so if isolation isn't possible, what's the next best thing? There has to be something." Zyla hesitated, biting her lip in a very uncharacteristic show of vulnerability. "There is one method, a temporary solution." Her voice dropped even lower, and I had to strain to hear her next words. "Physical contact can help reduce the intensity of the pheromones." "But it is not ideal," I blinked, taken aback by her implication. "Wait, physical contact, like?" "Between you and yes," she interrupted, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But it is not a long-term solution, and it could create complications." I felt my cheeks flush as the reality of the situation hit me. My boss, my incredibly intimidating, incredibly powerful alien boss, was suggesting something extremely unprofessional. "Zyla, I don't think that's—" "I know," she said quickly, straightening up as she regained some of her composure. "I know. It is not appropriate, which is why I have been trying to avoid it. But the longer this goes on, the more dangerous the situation becomes. The pheromones will continue to escalate until things spiral out of control." I didn't need to be told twice. The last thing I wanted was a bunch of pheromone-crazed aliens wreaking havoc in the office. But the idea of getting close to Zyla in that way, it felt impossible. Yet at the same time my heart was pounding so hard that I could barely think straight. Was this her pheromones at work too? "We need another plan," I said, trying to clear my head. "There's got to be some kind of technology or barrier we can use to block the pheromones, right? This is a state-of-the-art corporation. Surely we have something." Zyla's expression softened slightly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Perhaps. There may be an environmental control system that could filter the air in my office. If we reroute the ventilation systems to expel the pheromones, it might reduce the impact on the rest of the office." "Great," I said, jumping on the idea. "I'll get the engineering team on it right away." But before I could step out of the office, Zyla grabbed my wrist, her touch sending an electric shock through my system. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I don't know if that will be enough." I turned to look at her, my pulse racing as her violet eyes bore into mine. I could feel the pheromones affecting me more intensely now. Her proximity, her touch, her scent, it was overwhelming. "Then what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Zyla's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but the moment was interrupted by the loud chime of my comm link. I snapped out of the trance-like state and glanced down at the message on my wrist console. It was from the head of HR. There had been several complaints of inappropriate behavior throughout the office, and tensions were rising fast. "We don't have much time," I said, stepping back from her. "I'll get the engineers to fix the ventilation. You stay here and try to keep things under control." Zyla nodded, her eyes still locked on mine. "Be quick, Jake. I don't know how long I can hold out." As I rushed out of her office, my heart still pounding and my mind racing, I couldn't help but feel like we were running out of options. This was no longer just an office issue. This was about to become an intergalactic incident if we didn't act fast. Chapter 3, Pheromone Frenzy. The moment I left Zyla's office, I could already feel the pressure mounting. The low hum of office chatter had turned into something much more frantic. Employees were fidgeting at their desks, eyes darting around as though they were searching for something or someone. It wasn't just a few coworkers anymore. The entire floor was on edge, and the pheromones were clearly to blame. I hurried down the hall, trying to shake off the lingering effects of Zyla's presence. I could still feel the warmth of her hand on my wrist, and her intoxicating scent clung to my clothes like a shadow. The idea that her pheromones were driving people in the office into a frenzy made sense now, because even I, her closest confidant in this chaos, wasn't immune. As I approached the engineering wing, I could hear a heated argument taking place inside. The door slid open, and I was immediately greeted by the sight of my colleague Reggie, a tall, broad-shouldered human, squaring off against one of the Zelfar engineers, Rena, who was from a planet where calm logic ruled all decisions normally. But not today. Rena's eyes were wild, her hands clenching into fists as she shouted something about territorial control. Reggie, normally the peacemaker, was yelling back at her with just as much intensity. "Hey," I called out, stepping between them before things could escalate further. "What the hell's going on here?" Reggie, his face flushed with anger, turned to me, his eyes flashing. This alien freak is trying to override my authority on this project. She's messing with the ventilation systems, and it's going to screw everything up." Rena hissed, her usually calm demeanor completely gone. "You have no idea what you're doing, human. The ventilation systems are delicate, and you're interfering my calibrations." I raised both hands, trying to defuse the situation. Okay. Everyone just take a deep breath. We're all on the same side here." I glanced at Reggie. "You're upset because Rena's trying to override your work, right?" Reggie glared at me, still visibly agitated, but he nodded. "Damn right I am. She doesn't understand how the filters work on this floor. If we reroute everything too quickly, it'll overload the system. And you," I turned to Rena, who was still bristling with tension, "you're worried that Reggie's going to mess up the calibrations?" Rena took a deep breath, her chest heaving. "Yes. I've been working on this system for months, and he's about to undo all of my progress." I stepped back, taking a moment to think. I couldn't afford to let this argument escalate any further. The pheromones were clearly getting to both of them, and if I didn't act fast, the entire engineering team could end up at each other's throats. "Listen, we don't have time for this," I said, my voice firm but calm. "We need to reroute the ventilation system to Zyla's office now. Her pheromones are affecting the entire office, and if we don't fix this soon, it's going to turn into a full-blown disaster." Both Reggie and Rena stared at me, the weight of my words finally breaking through their haze of anger. Reggie was the first to speak. "Pheromones?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Wait, is this that mating period thing I heard about? I thought that was just a rumor." "It's not a rumor," I said, my tone serious. "It's very real, and it's happening right now. Zyla's mating period is causing her to release pheromones that are messing with everyone's heads. If we don't get the ventilation system to filter them out, things are going to get a lot worse." Rena's expression shifted from anger to concern. "If that's true, then we have to act quickly. The air filtration system can be adjusted to handle the pheromones, but it will require precise recalibration. If Reggie and I work together, we can redirect the flow into Zyla's office and reduce the spread." Reggie's face softened, and he sighed heavily. "Fine, let's do it." With the tension between them diffused, I watched as they both dove into their work, adjusting the controls on the nearby panel. The holographic interface lit up with various schematics of the building's air filtration system. They worked quickly, their hands moving with expert precision as they rerouted the ventilation systems to channel the pheromones directly out of Zyla's office and into a containment unit in the basement. As they worked, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be enough to stop the chaos from spreading any further. But then, as if on cue, my comm link buzzed. I glanced down and saw a message from HR. "We've had another incident. Several employees are reporting strange behavior, and we've had to remove 2 workers from the floor due to aggressive outbursts." "What the hell is going on?" My stomach dropped. I knew the situation was bad, but it was getting worse by the minute. "We're almost there," Rena said, her fingers flying over the console. "Just a few more minutes, and we can start filtering the air." "Good," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "because if we don't get this under control, there's going to be a full-blown riot out there." Just as I said that, the lights in the room flickered, and a loud, ominous buzzing sound echoed through the office. The ventilation system sputtered, and the holographic display in front of Rena and Reggie blinked out. "What the?" Reggie muttered, frantically tapping at the console. "The system's overloaded. We need to reset it before." Before he could finish his sentence, the lights flickered again, and the entire office was plunged into darkness. Damn it, I shouted, slamming my fist against the wall. The whole system's gone offline. Rena cursed under her breath, her calm facade completely shattered. This is bad. Without the filtration system, the pheromones will keep spreading. We need to get power back on immediately. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Zyla's pheromones were already wreaking havoc on the office, and now, without the ventilation system, there was no way to contain them. I had no idea how long we had before things went completely off the rails. Stay here, I said, my voice tight. I'm going to find out what's going on with the power. I ran through the darkened hallways, my comm link buzzing with more and more messages from HR, employees, and even security. The pheromone-induced frenzy was spreading faster than I could keep up, and the office was teetering on the edge of chaos. When I reached the maintenance room, I found the source of the problem, a blown fuse in the building's main power grid. It didn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. The ventilation system had overloaded, and now the entire office was suffering the consequences. I grabbed a spare fuse from the supply closet and set to work, my hands shaking as I tried to focus. I couldn't afford to screw this up. If the power didn't come back on soon, the situation would be completely out of control. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to replace the fuse and restore power to the building. The lights flickered back on, and I let out a long, relieved breath. But as I headed back toward the engineering wing, I realized that the damage had already been done. Employees were spilling into the hallways, shouting, laughing, and alarmingly, some of them were much too close for comfort. The pheromones had taken full effect, and the office was descending into chaos. People were behaving irrationally, some even dangerously, and in the middle of it all was Zyla, standing at the entrance to her office, her usually cold and composed demeanor completely shattered. Her violet eyes were glowing with a wild, desperate energy, and her skin shimmered with the golden hue I'd seen earlier. "Jake," she called out, her voice laced with a strange mix of desperation and urgency. "It's too late, the pheromones. I can't control it anymore." I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at her, realizing that we were out of time. The pheromones had spread too far, and now the entire office was caught in the frenzy. Chapter 4, The Breaking Point. The scene in front of me was utter madness. Employees were caught in a whirlwind of confusion and aggression, some laughing hysterically while others shouted, their faces red with frustration. I saw two workers, normally quiet and reserved, engaged in what could only be described as a wrestling match right in the middle of the corridor, knocking over office plants and scattered datapads as they tussled on the floor. The pheromones had fully infected the building, and the few who hadn't completely succumbed were struggling to hold on to their sanity. Even I wasn't entirely immune. My heart raced, and my thoughts were clouded with a strange blend of fear and excitement. My body seemed to want to pull towards Zyla, as though every cell in me was reacting to her presence, but I couldn't afford to let the pheromones control me. "Not now. Zyla," I called out, pushing my way through the throngs of frenzied coworkers, trying to reach her. "We need to get out of here. This is spiraling out of control." She stood frozen at the entrance to her office, her body trembling. For the first time since I'd known her, Zyla, the fearless leader of Xenotech, looked scared. Her eyes, those usually cold violet orbs, flicked toward me with something like panic behind them. The golden shimmer across her skin had intensified, and even from several feet away, I could feel the pull of her pheromones growing stronger. "I can't," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Jake, it's too late. The pheromones are too powerful. I can't suppress them anymore." I reached her, grabbing her by the shoulders and forcing her to look at me. "We're not giving up. There's got to be something we can do." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, you don't understand. The Eloxarian mating period, it's uncontrollable once it reaches this point. The pheromones, they're designed to overwhelm everything, to ensure the continuation of our species. There's no stopping it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This was biology in its most primal form, and it was tearing apart the very fabric of our workplace. But I refused to believe it was hopeless. I had to think of something, anything, to reverse the effects. If the pheromones were meant to ensure mating, then they had to have some sort of endpoint, some way to dissipate once their purpose had been fulfilled. Suddenly a thought crossed my mind. "Wait," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You said physical contact helps reduce the intensity, right? What if we got you to a controlled environment, isolated from the rest of the office, and then dealt with the situation?" Zyla's eyes widened, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of purple, a sign of embarrassment for Illoxarians. "You mean?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of what I was suggesting. "Yes, I mean physical contact. If that's the only way to reduce the pheromones and stop this from turning into a complete disaster, then we might have to." Before I could finish my sentence, a loud crash echoed from down the hall. I turned to see a group of employees, 3 Cathelian hybrids and 2 human workers, knocked over several desks, their eyes wild with unrestrained aggression. They were shouting, pushing and shoving, as if their very instincts had been hijacked by the pheromones. "We're out of time," I said, turning back to Zyla. "We have to do something now." Zyla hesitated for a moment, her entire body trembling as she fought against her own nature. Finally she nodded, her eyes filling with resolve. "There's an isolation chamber in the sub-basement, used for biological experiments. It's equipped with environmental controls. We can contain the pheromones there, but we have to get there first." "Let's move," I said, grabbing her hand. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of heat surged through me, but I forced myself to focus. This wasn't the time to lose control. Together, we pushed through the chaos of the office, dodging frenzied employees and overturned furniture as we made our way to the emergency stairwell. Zyla's hand was still in mine, and I could feel her tension through the tight grip she maintained. Every step was a struggle, her body barely containing the storm of pheromones raging within her. We finally reached the stairwell and rushed down the steps, the sounds of chaos fading behind us as we descended deeper into the building. The air in the stairwell was cooler, clearer, but the faint trace of Zyla's pheromones still lingered, making my heart pound harder than it should have. By the time we reached the sub-basement, both of us were breathing heavily, the strain of resisting the pheromones taking its toll. Zyla keyed in the access code to the isolation chamber, and the heavy reinforced doors slid open with a soft hiss. The chamber itself was a small, sterile room, its walls lined with smooth, reflective metal. There was a single bed in the center, clearly meant for isolation and recovery, and several monitoring devices hummed quietly in the background. The air here was filtered, crisp and cold, providing a sharp contrast to the heated, pheromone-soaked atmosphere of the office above. Zyla stepped inside, and I followed, the doors sealing shut behind us with a final hiss. The sound of the locks engaging was oddly comforting. It meant we were safe. For now I turned to face Zyla, who stood in the center of the room, her eyes locked on mine. Her breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I can hold out much longer." I stepped closer to her, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, and I could feel the pull of her pheromones more intensely than ever. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to act, to give in to the primal urge coursing through my veins. But I couldn't. This was my boss, my alien boss, no less, and despite the madness unfolding around us, I had to maintain control. I had to be the one to stay grounded, to help her through this without letting things spiral into something we couldn't take back. "There's got to be another way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Some way to release the pheromones without crossing that line." Zyla's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she shook her head. "Jake, there's no other way. Once an Illoxarian's mating period begins, the pheromones demand fulfillment. If we don't act, the effects will only intensify, and it will spread beyond just the office." Her words hung in the air, heavy with inevitability. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm despite the wild, conflicting emotions swirling inside me. "If that's the only way," I said quietly, stepping even closer, "then we'll do it on our terms. We'll control it." Zyla looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment we stood there in silence, the weight of our decision hanging over us like a storm cloud. Then slowly she reached out and took my hand again, her fingers trembling as they laced with mine. The connection between us was electric, and I could feel the intensity of her pheromones surging through my body, igniting a fire in my veins. But this time, instead of letting it consume me, I focused on staying grounded, on being present in the moment. I wasn't going to let this spiral out of control. "Together," I said softly, my eyes locked on hers. "We'll get through this together." Zyla nodded, her grip tightening on my hand as we stood there, preparing to face the storm that had been building between us for days. The isolation chamber hummed softly around us, a stark contrast to the chaos above. In this moment, it was just the two of us, alone in the eye of the storm, and as the pheromones reached their peak, we found a way to ride out the storm, together in control and on our own terms. By the time the crisis passed, the office above had returned to normal. The ventilation system had been restored, and the pheromones had been contained within the isolation chamber. Zyla, her body finally free of the overwhelming effects of her mating period, stood next to me as we exited the chamber. The madness was over, and the office would never know the full extent of what had happened. As for Zyla and me, we'd been through something that had changed us both. Though things would eventually return to normal, the bond we had formed in that moment, born out of necessity, forged in the heat of chaos, would remain. We had survived the storm together,